I'll call this meeting here in Newark City Council to order. Jennifer, please call the roll.
Mr. Blake.
Here.
Mr. Bub. Mr. Cost.
Here.
Mr. Fennell.
Here.
Mr. Frazier.
Present.
Mrs. Hall.
Here.
Mr. Labutus.
Here.
Mr. Lang.
Here.
Mr. Marmee. Mr. Rath.
Here. We have 9 present this evening. I'd like to thank Jennifer Long also for sitting in tonight as our assistant clerk. So, next on the agenda we have the invocation by Scott Hayes. Please stand.
Let's pray. Father God, we thank you for this day, and we thank you for our great city of Newark and the leadership of Mayor Hall and all those councilmen and women that serve so sacrificially and give to our community and our neighborhood. And Father, I just pray that your favor would rest on them. I'm grateful and thankful for all the many variety of talents and gifting that you've given each man and woman. I just pray for your discernment, that you would help them to make good decisions and the things that you've given them to care for. We just ask that you bless their meeting, give them wisdom, give them experience, and we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Scott. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next on the agenda we have caucus. That's the time for council to discuss anything pertaining to the agenda tonight. Do we have anything?
Mr. President, I'd like to move
Mr. Lang?
I'd like to move to excuse Mr. Marmee.
Second.
Motion to excuse Mr. Marmee by Mr. Lang, second by Mr. Frazier. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Thank you. Next, we have the minutes of our October 15, 2018 meeting. Is there a motion to approve those? Motion by Mr. Labutus.
Second.
Second by Mr. Frazier. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. That passes. We have 2 reports this evening from standing committees, one from Finance and one from Capital Improvements. Without objection, those will be received and filed. Also under communications, we have 2. One from Roger Loomis, the Water Administrator, liens for the past due water, sewer, and stormwater bills in the amount of $21,979.01. And one from the Ohio Division of Liquor Control, a new application for Kimberly Real Property LLC at 30 South 3rd Street. Without objection, those will be received and filed. We do have a public hearing this evening, so I'm going to open the public hearing. Jennifer, if you'd read that for me, please.
Ordinance 18-23 by Mr. Rath, Mr. Cost, Mr. Marmee. An ordinance changing the zoning classification of certain real property generally described as 451 Van Tassel Avenue, City of Newark, Licking County, Ohio, from that of medium-intensity business zoning district to general business zoning district.
Once again, this is a public hearing. This is your chance to speak for or against this particular item. Do we have anyone on to speak for or against this in this public hearing? Sir, if you'd come up and give us your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Vincent Russo, business address 2526 Maple Avenue, Zanesville, Ohio. And I am the original applicant that requested a zoning change. The intent is to put a restaurant at that location, and that's why we asked for the zoning change. I think on that particular block on the east side of North 21st Street, it's kind of up against a residential area. And so it had a lower zoning classification, but on the west side of 21st Street, to the south of that property and to the north of that property, it's all general business along North 21st Street there. So that's why we asked for that zoning designation. I think there was one lesser designation that would have accommodated a restaurant, but we just asked to be in line with the other zoning classifications surrounding that property. And, thank you.
Anyone else want to speak for or against? Anyone for or against? Okay, we're going to close the public hearing. Jennifer, if you'll read it again for a second time, please. This will be our second reading of 18-23.
Ordinance 18-23 by Mr. Rath, Mr. Cost, Mr. Marmee. An ordinance changing the zoning classification of certain real property generally described as 451 Van Tassel Avenue, City of Newark, Licking County, Ohio, from that of medium-intensity business zoning district to general business zoning district.
In your packet is a letter from the Planning Commission that has approved this. You've heard the second reading of 18-23. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Rath?
I'd like to make a motion to adopt 18-23.
Motion by Mr. Rath.
Second.
Second by Mr. Frazier.
Jeremy.
Is there any discussion on 18-23? Seeing none, Jennifer, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
Mr. Fennell?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Mrs. Hall?
yes,
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
18-23 passes 9-0. Thank you. Next on the agenda, we have comments from citizens. There are two places for comments from citizens. One is now, and one is after the legislation. If you have a comment, please raise your hand. I'll point you out and have you come up. Ma'am? You can just give us your name and address for the record. Again, this is not a debate with council. This is just your chance to be heard.
Hi, my name is Tiffany Lawrence. I live at 84 Manning Street. My family's lived in the same house over 50 years. I'm here because I'm incredibly concerned about the recycling plant center that was opened on Manning Street. Throughout the entire summer, pests, terrible smells have become increasingly problematic. Flies, mice especially. And the entire time we lived there, we've never had that issue until that recycling center was opened. It is now brought to my attention that it has been abandoned, still filled with garbage, and pests still persist. I'm concerned because the company that opened has a history of the same behaviors. I know in Toledo, the last I knew, they were still fighting with these people, and I can't remember the other county. There was a fire that was suspicious and fatal. I'm concerned that the same thing is going to happen in my neighborhood, and I don't want to see that happen. My family's lived there over 50 years, quite peacefully and happily, and I don't want to see anything like that happen to my family's home or my neighbors. I'm concerned, given their history, why were they allowed to open? And I would like to know what is and will be done about this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. This has been closed for a while, correct?
Oh, I'm sorry.
This has been closed for a while.
Yes,
Yes, thank you.
a few months.
Anyone else for this first section of citizens' comments? Okay. We'll move on to ordinances on the first reading, 18-34.
Ordinance 18-34 by Mr. Rath, Mr. Cost. Ordinance amending an ordinance passed on September 17, 2018, providing for the issuance of not to exceed $5 million of bond anticipation notes in anticipation of the issuance of bonds for the purpose of paying the cost of replacement of water main and service lines and all necessary appurtenances, including but not limited to hydrants, valves, and fittings, and to provide additional funds to pay for other water system improvements and declaring an emergency.
This is on the first reading, but it is an emergency. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Blake.
move to adopt 1834.
Motion by Mr. Blake.
Second.
Second by Mr. Frazier. Is there any discussion on 18-34? Seeing none, Jennifer, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
Mr. Fennell?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Mrs. Hall?
yes,
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
18-34 passes 9-0. Next, we move on to resolutions on the second reading, 18-79.
Resolution 18-79 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Cost, Mr. Rath, Mr. Lang. A resolution authorizing and directing the mayor of the city of Newark to prepare and submit applications to the Department of Homeland Security for fiscal year 2018 Fire Act grant programs in support of training programs, equipment purchases, funding for personnel, fire prevention, and fire safety programs throughout the city.
You've heard the second reading of 18-79. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Blake.
move to adopt 1879.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Blake, second by Mr. Cost. Is there any discussion on 18-79? Seeing none, Jennifer, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
Mr. Fennell?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yep.
Mrs. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Rabb?
Yes.
18-79 passes 9-0. Next, for the second reading, we move on to 18-81.
Resolution 18-81 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Cost, Mr. Rath, Mr. Lang, a resolution authorizing and directing the mayor of the city of Newark to prepare and submit applications to the Ohio Department of Public Safety for fiscal year 2018 Edward Byrne Justice Assistance Grant funding.
You've heard the second reading of 18-81. What is your wish?
Mr. President.
Mr. Blake.
Motion to adopt 1881.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Blake.
Second.
Second by Mr. Frazier. Is there any discussion on 18-81? Seeing none, Jennifer, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
Mr. Fennell?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Mrs. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Rabb?
Yes.
18-81 passes 9-0. Next, we have 18-82.
Resolution 18-82 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Cost, Mr. Rath, Mr. Lang, a resolution appropriating monies for current expenses of the municipal corporation.
You've heard the second reading of 18-82. What is your wish?
Mr. President.
Mr. Blake.
Motion to adopt 1882.
Motion by Mr. Blake.
Second.
Second by Mr. Frazier. Is there any discussion on 18-82? Seeing none, Jennifer, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
Mr. Fennell?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Mrs. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Rabb?
Yes.
18-82 passes 9-0. Now we'll move on to resolutions on the first reading. 18-83.
Resolution 18-83 by Mr. Rath, Mr. Cost, a resolution authorizing and directing the mayor of the city of Newark to prepare and submit to the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development a one-year use of funds/action plan, along with an application for fiscal year 2019 federal community development block grant funds as required by 24 CFR Part 91.220 for various programs related to housing and community development.
18-83 will be held for 2 weeks for our next reading, for our second reading. Next, we have on the first reading 18-84.
Resolution 18-84 by Mr. Rath, Mr. Cost, a resolution appropriating monies for current expenses of the municipal corporation.
18-84 will be held for 2 weeks for our second reading. Next, we have 18-85.
Resolution 18-85 by Mr. Rath, Mr. Cost, a resolution appropriating monies for current expenses of the municipal corporation.
And 18-85 will be held for 2 weeks for our second reading. And finally tonight, we have 18-86.
Resolution 18-86 by Mr. Cost, Mr. Rath, a resolution appropriating monies for current expenses of the municipal corporation.
18-86,
Mr. President.
Mr. Blake.
Motion to waive the 2-day reading rule.
Motion to waive the 2-day reading rule by Mr. Blake.
Second.
Second by Mr. Frazier. Mr. Blake.
This is a payout for an employee.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. Jennifer, please call the roll to waive the 2-day reading rule.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
Mr. Fennell?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Mrs. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Rabb?
Yes.
2-day reading rule has been waived. Mr. Blake.
Move to adopt 1886.
Move to adopt by Mr. Blake.
Second.
Second by Mr. Frazier. Is there any other discussion on 18-86? Seeing none, Jennifer, please call the roll vote.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
Mr. Fennell?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Mrs. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Rabb?
Yes.
18-86 passes 9-0. And that concludes the legislation tonight. Thank you for your attention. Next on our agenda, we have our second opportunity for comments from citizens. Again, the same rules apply. This is not a debate with council. This is just your chance to be heard. Do we have anyone? Okay. Do we have anyone from administration tonight? Honorable Law Director.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will pass.
Thank you, Mr. Sassen. Mayor Hall.
Yes, just 3 things. Scott Hayes, I want to thank him for coming in this evening and sharing some of his ideas. I think that's really thinking out of the box, and he's the first one to admit it's not a solution to everything, but it's surely a step in the right direction, and it's a different way of looking at things. He understands it well, and we appreciate that. Second of all, on Friday night, Licky Memorial held their Lifetime Achievement Award reception, and Chris Meyer was awarded that, and I want to give him congratulations. It's a nice turnout and well received. And then finally, yesterday was the toy run, and it went from the Walmart in Heath down to our Salvation Army. They think it might have been the largest ever. Motorcycles, potentially 1,000. So it was. I was out there, and it was quite a sight to see. Each one of them have to submit one unwrapped toy, and so what a great way to start out the holiday season for many families that otherwise wouldn't have anything under the tree. So with that, I want to thank all those motorcycle riders. I will pass. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Blake.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do want to thank Tiffany Lawrence and her mother for coming in tonight. I think they're out there in the hallway trying to see Safety Director Baum, but
They are.
So hopefully they'll get a chance to talk with him about the issues on Manning Street. But thank you very much for coming in tonight to express your concerns. I do need to call on behalf of Councilman Marmee of Finance Committee, and with that I'll yield.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. Mr. Bub.
I will pass, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bub. Mr. Cost.
I will pass, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cost. Mr. Fennell. Mr. Frazier.
Mr. President, I'll keep it brief. I also want to thank Scott Hayes and Vertical 196 for the work that they're planning to do in their grand opening, and anything that we can do to help ease the situation and find opportunities for people to get help absolutely should be embraced. I want to thank Director Motter for coming and speaking to the committee today about the 2019 funding of the Community Development Block Grant. The HHCA is going to have a meeting on Thursday at 7 p.m. Also, it's Election Tuesday coming up tomorrow, so good luck, Jeremy, on the election, as well as encourage everybody to vote and be informed and make your voice heard at the polls. With that, I'll yield.
Mr. Frazier. Ms. Hall.
Yes, thank you. I too want to thank Scott Hayes for his efforts for the homeless. I think that might just be a beginning, and it'll grow, hopefully. And thank you, Mr. Meyer, for your report. It's interesting. Thank you. And with that, I'll pass.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Mr. Labutus.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to thank, again, Scott Hayes for being here this evening. Great things that he's doing for the city, and it bridges the gap of something that wasn't there previously. And I think it's just the beginning. So extremely proud of him, and being able to have that many volunteers come in to help him, especially for the first day. And today, he was able to change 38 lives that otherwise were different yesterday. So thanks for that. Also, make sure to vote tomorrow, and I will pass.
Thank you, Mr. Labutus. Mr. Lang.
Yeah, so first I would like to really commend the folks who are putting on the Citizens Police Academy. Mr. Rath and I had the pleasure of going out to the Newark firing range this past week and had a very impressive demonstration from our special ops group. I won't steal Mr. Rath's thunder, but the K-9 unit also did a very, very interesting demonstration. And I was just generally impressed with the way that they conduct. You know, they do some very, very challenging things. They make it look real easy. So when that comes around again, I'd really advise anybody who has an opportunity to take that program to really go ahead and seize that opportunity. And then I would also like to remind everybody to go vote tomorrow. One issue in particular that I would urge everyone to vote no on is issue 1. While I think it does seek to address some very important issues in our community, I don't think it's the right way to go about it. I'd like to point out, along with the Ohio State Bar Association and the Ohio Judicial Conference, all 7 of our local elected judges have opposed that. And most telling, this past weekend, the Ohio Society of Addiction Medicine, that's a group representing all the doctors who specialize in addiction medicine, have come out and opposed this. And this is not about having or not having compassion towards those who are addicted. It's about whether or not we're addressing it and we're going to cause more good than harm. And I think what's going to come out of the way that issue 1 is written is the opposite. We've got some great judges here in Licking County, and in particular, I'm fearful of this issue just because of what it may do to our drug courts here locally, what it may do to our municipal court budgets, and I don't want to take discretion away from those judges. So again, I would urge everyone to get out and vote vote no on issue 1. With that, I'll yield.
Thank you, Mr. Lang. We are all coming next week when they tase you and Mr. Rath, so we'll be excited to see that. Mr. Rath.
Thank you. Yes, we've not had an opportunity to test the taser yet, but I'm looking forward to Mr. Lang stepping up and volunteering for that.
Won't be there.
Huh?
I won't be there.
That's right, you won't. I guess somebody else is going to have to do that because I sure ain't. But it was interesting taking a bite from Bear, one of our canine officers. It is incredibly intimidating and nerve-wracking and exhilarating, and I mean, to put it simply, it scared the crap out of me. But when it was all over and said and done, it was a lot of fun. It was very interesting. So I appreciate Bear taking it easy on me and hitting the pad and not missing. That was cute. That was essential. I also want to encourage everybody to vote tomorrow, do your patriotic duty, as I do every single Monday before an election. I have never ever endorsed an individual candidate or an issue or encouraged anybody how to vote before in the 9 years that I've been up here, but I'm going to implore you to please vote no on issue 1. It is that important that I'll say it from right here. It will cost lives. It will take away valuable treatment programs. It'll just be absolutely devastating to the state of Ohio. It will do nothing that it says it will do in the first 4 lines of the way it's written. Not only that, it's a constitutional amendment, so it will take years and millions of dollars to change it if everything I'm saying is right, or even if part of what I'm saying is right. It's not a law, it's a constitutional amendment, so it will take forever and a lot of effort to fix it if it's wrong. As far as I know, everybody that's an authority on this subject says it's wrong, at least within the state of Ohio. So all the yes monies and all the yes imploring and advertising is coming from outside of the state of Ohio. I'd appreciate it if they just stay there, and please, please, please vote no on issue 1. I feel that strongly about it. I wanted to thank Scott Hayes for coming and doing the work that he's doing. And I would like to call a service committee meeting, and with that I will pass.
Thank you, Mr. Rath. I'd also like to thank Mr. Hayes for his participation tonight. Thanks to Jennifer for sitting in. Did a great job, thank you. Our next committee meeting will be 5:45 here in this room on November 19th. Next full council will be at 7 o'clock. The Personnel Committee will reconvene right after we get this done for 2 more items. Mr. Bub, I'll show you how to run a meeting if you want a little help on that, so you don't have to run into council next time. Mr. Bub also volunteered Mr. Frazier to be tasered. We'll keep that in mind too. Is there a motion adjourned? Motion by Mr. Scott, second by Mr. Bruce. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. We're adjourned. Thank you.